The theme of this year's event being the light in the darkness is particularly poignant, and I am aware that there have been moments over the past year where a ray of light in what has felt like very, very dark times has given people the hope to continue. For Holocaust Memorial Day, it's really about shining light on what can be really difficult issues and topics. Very often for people to speak out in what is a hostile environment can feel tough, but it's to remind people that they can be that light, and those who do speak out should be supported.
I think it's a very broad phrase, as there are many ways of being a light in the darkness. One thing that really strikes me about the theme this year is how it is relevant for today, about how we can still see darkness around us. We can see rising anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, intolerance and prejudice against minority groups, and there is still very much a need for people to stand up and be a light in that darkness, to not just be bystanders.
So this year, as we celebrate the light in the darkness, we also see what's happening in the world today and how we can currently support humanity through all the discrimination and persecution that different people have suffered.
The light in the darkness is actually quite extraordinary, and in fact, it really is an amazing thing to understand. The Torah had described, as the Bible describes, it says, "L'chol bnei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam," and all of the children of Israel had light in their dwelling places. And I think that is a metaphor for the notion that even if you're surrounded by darkness, if you have a sense of inner light, that there is something to look forward to, no matter how bleak, no matter how difficult, no matter how distant, that moment of hope is what takes you through the darkness, and please God, all of us will be blessed with light again.
As the Nazis grew in power, their anti-Jewish policies led to many people trying to flee Germany and Nazi-occupied countries. Greta Glauber was 9 years old when she left Austria and her mother for England on a Kindertransport. She settled with a family friend in Enfield and started attending Enfield County School. She wrote about her experiences in a school essay titled "My First Impression of England."
On my arrival in England, I was not very much impressed by what I saw. It was a wet and cold and foggy April day, and when I looked out of the train window, all I could see was spots of rain on my train window and people going about in large Macintoshes and Wellingtons looking very strange and uncomfortable. I did not like this at all, because when I had left my home 2 days ago, it was a lovely day. But I courageously got out of my carriage, more from excitement than real fear of the rain, and was soon led to a trolley bus. It sounds all right now, but when I first saw a big double-decker bus loom out of the fog, I was really, well, it's hard to describe my feeling. I was just astonished and was rather frightened to get inside in case the top fell off. My fear was soon over and the bus moved off quite smoothly except for a few bumps. I was very charmed when I got to my new home to find it was a tiny house. It was not tiny really. I was used to big blocks of flats and had never seen a house just on its own before. With its own front door and stairway, I liked it very much.
The Kindertransport was a rescue mission to rescue, it was mostly Jewish children from Nazi Germany and also Nazi occupied countries, including Austria, where of course Greta Glauber came from. Campaigners were able to convince the British government to relax immigration laws for children to come to Britain. It was only children aged 16 and under, and they would have been unaccompanied by their parents. Very quickly after this, the first train left Berlin, and trains continued to come bringing children here up until September 1939 when war broke out. In total, there were around 10,000 children who were saved this way.
And Greta was not the only one to arrive in Enfield. In Winchmore Hill, Abraham Lewin and his wife threw open their doors and provided shelter to more than 20 young people in their own home.
It's a 3-storey house a lot of rooms, but even so, even given the number of rooms, it still must have been a bit of a squeeze with so many children. And then there was all the feeding and seeing to their needs.
They don't know his language. He doesn't know their language. They wanted different food. They were going to have nightmares at home. Can you imagine? And the clothing, the food. I don't know how he did it. The laundry. What? I was just blown away with this chesed, this kindness, that it's superhuman.
Must have been a pretty chaotic setup there. Nevertheless, from the reports I've got from people that stayed with him, everyone was very happy and very, very pleased to be there.
Although he couldn't do anything physically to stop the war or to interfere in what was happening, but he did his part here by looking after all those people, and he therefore was the epitome of being a light in the darkness. The kids who were separated from the parents, and who knows what else. I just wonder about him. The guy, what kind of kitchen could he have had in that house that could feed over 30 people? What about the toilet facilities? I don't know if they had an inside toilet. I don't know, but this man, that was an enormous thing. He was being a light.
Abraham Lewin went on to become a rabbi, and in 1949 he founded the Enfield and Winchmore Hills Synagogue, in the same house used to shelter the children from the Kindertransport. However, it was not easy for people to find a safe place to escape the Nazis. Gerald Granston was just 5 years old when he and his father tried to leave Germany.
I experienced not just prejudice, but what I call state prejudice. Judenschwein, Jew pig, that was common. All shops, no dogs, no Jews served. I was born in a little village called Heschingen, south of Stuttgart, and people say you can't remember things when you were 5 years old. And I say my catalyst was the morning of the 10th November 1938, the morning of Kristallnacht. I remember clearly my grandfather running home, crying, the synagogue's destroyed. We weren't attacked as many Jews were. Their houses were ransacked, they were arrested. But they still trashed the synagogue. So where do you go? There were very few countries that accepted Jews.
Gerald's father managed to buy a visa for Cuba, and along with 935 other refugees, they chartered a ship to travel from Hamburg to Havana, the MS St. Louis.
Now the ship was commanded by a most wonderful human being, a man called Captain Schroeder, who is one of my heroes. He told the ship's company, forget what's happening in Germany today. These passengers are our passengers, and we will look after them. Forget they're Jews, they're our passengers. I remember distinctly queuing to go up the banks and hearing the Centurion voice say, "Du, Jude, here, you Jew here." They took your picture. To this day, I'm doing you a great favor because I have a fear of cameras. Great fear of cameras. I also have great fear of water. We'll come to that later.
Having arrived in Enfield, Greta Glauber was now living happily with her foster mother, a schoolteacher named Olive Rudkin, or Auntie O as Greta called her. She began attending Enfield County School, but as her school report shows, adjusting to her new life was not easy.
Greta just has a good in 2 subjects, history and geography. She is satisfactory or below standard in all her other subjects, and the comments on her school report from her teachers next to each subject are not the most positive. Greta has ability, but is often too lazy to use it. Other reports say that she does not show enough interest in her subjects, that she is too careless, that she needs to try harder. At this time, obviously, Greta was going through a huge emotional strain, so it can seem a little bit unsympathetic to what was going on in her life away from school at this time. Greta's mother, Elsa, had always had the intention of being able to join her daughter in England, and she was working really hard to try to apply for a visa. However, in a letter that arrives on the 11th of September 1939, Elsa writes that she has a visa, but it is now too late to get the last train out of Vienna because war had broken out, and war stopped many Jewish refugees from being able to come to this country. The last letter that Greta received from her mother was the 27th of August 1942, in which she writes that she hopes they will be reunited. But we know that wasn't the case. Trying to trace exactly what happened to Elsa is very difficult. All we can say for certain is that she was murdered in the Holocaust. Greta does show a lot of emotional maturity in the letters that we have from her. When she writes to her mother, she seems to be trying to reassure her, saying that she is fine and the school is fine, even when the school reports we have suggest that it doesn't seem to all be fine and that she was struggling with things. When she was separated from her Auntie O, from Olive Rudkin, again, she's very positive, saying that the people are nice, that she's doing all right. However, she must have been living with great uncertainty. Decisions about her future, Olive Rudkin does adopt her, and she takes the name Rudkin as well. After this, she went on to follow in her foster mother's footsteps and became an infant school teacher. One of the last documents in our collection dates to 1964 and is a school report, but of a different type because it is a report on a school teacher. It is of a Miss Rudkin at a school in Somerset, and it is highly, highly positive about her abilities as a teacher. Whilst Greta's story does have many elements of darkness in it, I think there are also multiple examples of light. I think Greta herself symbolises this light in a very dark story. Her positivity and her determination to try to bring comfort to her mother, who is going through very, very difficult circumstances, and her aunt. She's always trying to encourage them, trying to convince them she's fine and they don't need to worry. You have the individuals who helped, who stood up and did something, like Olive Rudkin. And then I suppose you also have the type of light in Greta's life that she went on to do. Greta's childhood came at a time of darkness. Greta was fortunate in that she was able to get a place on the Kindertransport. She was able to escape. She was able to survive the Holocaust. And she went on to go and bring light to other people as an infant school teacher. So I think she herself is the main example of light for me in that story.
Going on the St. Louis was to me an adventure. So I got to Hamburg, obviously excited, and when we sailed, May the 13th, 1939, we knew our place. We were Jews, we were vermin, we were Untermenschen. The voyage to Cuba, 2 weeks, was a wonderful, wonderful, joyous occasion. Problems started when we got to Cuba.
When the St. Louis arrived in Havana, it was refused entry to dock. Despite all the passengers believing they had legal visas, the Cuban government refused to accept anybody.
I remember queuing with my dad, proudly holding a little suitcase, awaiting immigration and customs who came on the ship, and they were wonderfully happy. Hello, hello. But I learned my one and only word of Spanish on that morning. Mañana, mañana, tomorrow. And off they went. And when they came back tomorrow, and it was the same scenario, panic became evident to him. What's gone wrong? What's gone wrong? Why can't we get off the ship? Captain Schroeder put on civilian clothes, went to Havana, begged nothing. He was now being plagued by the Hamburg American line. Get back to your ship and bring it back to Hamburg. We need the ship here. My father said to me many times that he actually spoke to Captain Schroeder and said to him, Captain, you will be bringing an empty ship back to Germany because we would rather jump overboard and drown than go back to Germany. So it was a terrible time. Schroeder then up anchor, but instead of sailing the ship back to Germany, for 5 days up and down the Florida coast, he was convinced that Roosevelt would say, bring the ship back. The New York Times had an interview with the harbor master of Miami, and his words today, I promise you, no port in America will allow the Jews to land, not the passengers, not the tourists, not the immigrants, whatever you want to call them, the Jews. So there was anti-Semitism there. We were so close, I could see the lights of the hotels in Florida. If we could see them, they could see the ship. And we then had to realize we were going back. I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
Having been turned away by Cuba and America, the St. Louis seemed destined to return to Nazi Germany. But on June 17, 1939, a deal was struck between Britain, France, Belgium and the Netherlands, each agreeing to admit a share of the passengers. Gerald and his father eventually landed in Southampton. He went on to lead a successful life and now lives in Enfield. However, not all the passengers were so lucky.
Those that came here all survived. Those that went to France, Belgium and Holland, half didn't. Because once war was declared and those countries were taken over by Germany, they were the first to be arrested and sent to camps. It was a terrifying 42 days on the St. Louis, there, back, and the time in Havana and up and down the Florida coast. We left on May the 13th. We got to Southampton on the 21st of June. So it was a long, long time. Captain Schroeder was eventually sacked. He did survive the war, but penniless. And in 1956, Schroeder was awarded a medal by the West German government for his humanitarian treatment of his passengers. He died soon after, but he has been honored in the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as a righteous amongst the Gentiles. So his name is remembered. And when my daughter or I go to Jerusalem, always find the memorial to him. Because without him and his guts, I wouldn't be here.
Very quickly, it became apparent that Jews were not going to be tolerated by the Nazi regime.
Gerald now travels around the country, sharing his story with young people. He has been awarded the British Empire Medal for his services to Holocaust education.
The main now of my talks is prejudice. And I warn the students, whether they are 14, 15-year-old or 18, 20-year-old, whatever. They are the future of this country. And if they don't fight prejudice, it'll take over. Prejudice is the most evil thing, whether it is anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. You still have prejudice to this day. I would love to be able to say that the Holocaust, 1939-45, was the end. There have been many other Holocausts since then.
So often the sort of phrase that goes with the Holocaust is never again. And I think it's important that we remember that there have been genocides since then. The Holocaust is not just something that happened in a different time, that is past, that is over, that we can remember, but we don't need to sort of be wary of in that sense. It is still important to remember what does happen when you let discriminatory language and prejudice go unchecked, how quickly these sorts of things can build up, and that it has happened multiple times since the Holocaust, and so we need to be on the lookout in our own society for examples of prejudice. Keep remembering and keep educating people.
Holocaust Memorial Day is not just a day to remember the Holocaust itself. It is a day when you understand what can happen when societies misunderstand the importance and the power and the responsibility that they have to look after their people. There are many times we think that we're not the people who would do this. If we were in that situation, we would never contemplate something as horrific as this. But what is important to understand on Holocaust Memorial Day is that it wasn't monsters who created this final solution for the Jews, or who enabled the Third Reich to behave in a way that tried to systematically annihilate an entire people. What it says is that human beings were capable of this. And if those human beings were capable of this, then theoretically, any human beings are capable of this. That, I think, is a shocking realization. And we've seen it across the 20th century. We saw it in Stalinist Russia. We saw it in Maoist China, where millions of people were killed for a cause that they thought was greater than the people whose lives they were taking.
Remembering the genocides not only from the Nazis, but also Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and currently we're looking at the present day situations around the world, partnering with people that have gone through difficult times and saying, we hear you, we see you, and we are here with you.
Well, Enfield's an incredibly diverse borough, and it has been for many, many decades. It's a borough that so many different communities have chosen to make their home. You know, I am the granddaughter of immigrants who moved here to the UK in the 70s to also escape persecution.
Holocaust Memorial Day in Enfield is not just about remembering the past genocides and honoring those who died, but also is an opportunity for us in Enfield to learn lessons from the past, and through the stories that we hear of those who survived those traumatic times, we want to use it to help and bring our communities together.
When we see darkness around us, sometimes it can be too tempting to just sort of sit back, not want to be noticed, not raise our voices. But we need to speak up when we see discrimination around us. We need to speak up when we see people not being treated with tolerance that everybody deserves. We need to make our voices heard if we want to be a light in the darkness.
And the darkness is essentially, it's not just about evil. Sometimes darkness is just being ignorant and not being aware of what is happening. Sometimes it is ignoring difficult issues and difficult trends that exist in society and for the individual. And therefore, light is really the way to see the future, the way to build a better world.
We can take those ideas that we are discussing here and give people pause for thought, and maybe we can evaluate our own actions, decide on the best way forward, and ensure that the way we behave from this moment on will be for the positive embetterment of the societies around us. That, I think, is the ultimate lesson to learn from the Holocaust.
And as we say in the Jewish tradition, that a little light can disperse much darkness.